Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have part 1 of my November wrap-up. Last week, the first week of November, was quite a good reading week for me and I'd hoped that it would continue over the month. However, it hasn't, and we'll get to that at the end of this video. I started this month with the intention of trying to read 20 books. The reason behind this was simply because I thought, wouldn't it be nice to read 120 books by the end of the year, and if I read another 25, I'll get there, and that averages out at 10 books a month, and I'm quite a fan of being able to say that I did that. Anyway, it's also non-fiction November, in November, and because of that, there's some non-fiction in here. The first being Know Your Place, which is a collection of essays about the working class by working class writers. I enjoyed the essays in here. I'd been looking forward to this book since I found out that it existed. Last year I said that I wanted to read more about the working class, read more working class voices, and I haven't done that because I just never stick to what I say I'm going to try and do. But there's some great essays in here on what it means to be working class, some experiences people have had being working class. There are a few pieces in here that stuck out to me, but whilst it was good to finally be reading about people's experiences that were similar to mine, as some of the experiences within this book were somewhat similar to my own experiences, sometimes I did find myself going, yeah, no shit. You're hitting a nail on the head here. I never found myself bored. I did find myself wanting to read the other essays and see what other people's points of view and perspectives were. I liked that it took a different stance sometimes, and it was just people's experiences of what it means to be working class and how they felt being working class has almost influenced them. But I'm not necessarily sure I'd go back and reread it. I'm going to lend it out to people and stuff, and I think that it's still a good book to read, but I'm just not necessarily sure that it promotes rereading, really. I think it does what it says on the tin, and then you can just take it or leave it, really. Next, one of my plans this month was to read a non-fiction book, then a fiction book, non-fiction and fiction, and I did kind of begin the month like that. So the next book is The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night by Jen Campbell. This is going to be an extremely popular book across BookTube, as Jen Campbell is one of our own, really. She is a rather stupendous booktuber with some very informative videos on fairy tales, and she just has a really great channel. And when I discovered that she was releasing this collection, as many others on the BookTube were, I was quite glad for her. I was really looking forward to reading it. You've got this intermingling of fairy tales, and if you've watched Jen's videos, then you know that she knows her stuff. And I am not going to lie, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I read the majority of this collection sat in my car outside work whilst I waited for the volunteers to come, and I think that the short stories in here are great. As I mentioned previously, they weave in these fairy tale elements and this fabulism perfectly. They tug at heartstrings. There are stories in here that left me feeling the same way I did when I read Public Library and Other Stories by Ellie Smith 2 years ago, in that there are stories in here that I just want to go back and reread, not necessarily to unpick them or to do anything like I would have to do when I was a student, simply for the overall enjoyment of those stories and the fact that I just found them so utterly marvellous. I was never able to capture the writing of short stories myself. It is always something that I struggled with at uni, and this is a collection that is just filled with what I see as completely perfect short stories, and I think they give a great idea of the essence of Jen's writing and I just think that it's a collection that folks should share. We're getting close to Christmas. If you have any friends that enjoy reading them, this is a book that I'd suggest getting for them, because I feel like it's got a little bit of everything in here and it can take very sombre turns, and I'm just grateful that I read this book this month, and it is by far the best out of this wrap up. Next I read I Am by Maggie O'Farrell. A few months ago I read This Must Be the Place. I enjoyed O'Farrell's writing style, but I didn't necessarily enjoy the plot or the characters, and I thought it was a bit all over the place really, with no resolution. I got this book because it was a memoir, and because of Non-Fiction November, and because, like I say, I did enjoy O'Farrell's writing, and I find that a lot of prose writers, when they are writing their memoirs or any sort of autobiography, are able to do it well because they are able to heighten the dramatic moments, and they know what they're doing within the writing of it to make it a nicer experience for the reader. And whilst, again, O'Farrell can really write, she's writing about her own experiences here, I just didn't really care. I think that this is a book to read if you are a fan of Maggie O'Farrell and you've been reading her work for years and you want to know more about her as a writer and how her own life experiences has influenced her work. Because having read that book earlier this year, and also knowing about a writing magazine interview O'Farrell did a few years ago, I knew some things from her life had impacted upon a character within that book. And I think that aspect of it was good to see, and yeah, I think it's a book, like I say, it's written well. If you're a fan of Maggie O'Farrell, then you are going to want to read this book, because it is nice to see how a writers use their own life to influence their work, but it just wasn't necessarily right for me at this time. But had I read more of O'Farrell's work, then I think that I would have got more enjoyment out of it. As it stands, I think that some of the brushes with death within here are extremely tenuous, and were just there to bring it, just to fill some pages really, because there are some definite things in here that I think could have had more focus on them. Not necessarily that the author wanted to, but I just think that had they had more of a focus, then maybe I would have found the book a bit more impactful. Next I read Winter by Ali Smith. This is the second in her, what I imagine is going to be a quartet of seasonal books. Last year she released Autumn, and now we have this brilliantly grey book. It's called Winter, and they focus on things that are happening today. They are written in Ali Smith's typical style, and I don't know what it was about this one, but I didn't enjoy it as much as Autumn. I read it as quickly as I read Autumn, and I still think that it is great, but it didn't get me the same way Autumn got me. This book is about a man who was returning to his mother's house at Christmas. He's a bit of an eco-warrior, and he's got some sort of tumultuous relationship with his girlfriend, and now he wants a woman he's just met to pretend to be his girlfriend for his mother's sake. Only his mother isn't necessarily going through the best of times this Christmas, and so it's about all these four people coming together and just settling old scores really, going over old arguments and revealing things about themselves. It goes into the past, it talks about the now, and I think it's also talking about how difficult it can be for the elderly during winter time. And I think that using Christmas as the main focus of this book was a good idea, because it is the time when people come together and it can lead to more arguments. Obviously, with these characters come together, you are promised some drama straight away, because you know they aren't necessarily going to get on. I'm not sure why it didn't connect with me this time. I think that a lot of people are going to really enjoy this. I think a lot of people are going to get more out of it than I did. I'm definitely going to be rereading it alongside Autumn. But yeah, it didn't get me the way the last one did. Next I read Badgerlands by Patrick Barkham. Now, I had been looking forward to reading this book for well, it's one reason, really. I come from a farming background. My father is a farmer, my siblings all farm, and one of the big things at the moment, obviously we're kind of separated from it because we farm sheep rather than cattle, but is the badger cull in England. Now, I don't necessarily have an opinion about the badger cull myself, but it is an extremely contentious subject, and I, being in my position, because I have friends who go on, you know, they have the petitions against the badger cull, and they are very much activists against the badger cull. And then I have family friends who are for it, and so I'm very much in the middle. I'm very much one of these people who can't have an opinion on it because I'm on neither side, really. I can understand both perspectives on it. I didn't necessarily go into this book wanting it to talk about the badger cull, but I expected it to give me more of an idea because I knew that this book had come out around the time, and I did find out I liked the nature writing aspect of this. That's what I'll say first. I'll say that I enjoyed the nature writing aspect of this book, where I was finding out more about badgers, and I was finding out about how smart they are, about their, I suppose I can call it their sociology. We're enjoying that word this month. And I did, for the most part, enjoy it. And then we got about 250 pages in, and this writer revealed something about his search for badgers and discovering them that he hadn't mentioned in the other 250 pages, and I was like, oh, if he'd said it all along, I would have been fine with it, but just mentioning it there, I was a bit put off. And then you have the talk of the badger cull. If this book had presented the badger cull objectively, if it had talked about it from a different standpoint of just journalists going in and giving both sides of the story, then that would have been perfectly fine. But I got annoyed I'd already been annoyed at one point when people who were going and baiting badgers were described as mostly working class people of council estates, and describing how council estate lads dress as a stereotypical idea. That really annoyed me, and then moving on to just completely attack the farmers annoyed me even more. And then when you do get this statement from one woman regarding the badger cull, who is a farmer's wife, who talks about how protesters had put all of her personal details on the internet, including the fact that she had children, and she's received death threats and everything. You don't get any mention of how maybe that might not necessarily be the best thing in the world, because I am against any violence on any person's part. I don't care what your standpoint is on anything. I am against violence, against any sort of cruel intent towards people. And I didn't necessarily want the writer to disparage these people, to have a go at both sets of people. I didn't want him to have a go at farmers, and I didn't want him to have a go at protesters. I didn't want him to have a go at people who are pro-cull, and I didn't want him to be against people who are against the cull. I didn't want that. What I wanted was somebody who was going to objectively present the facts, and for the most part I got that about the research into the cull, but I didn't get that when the cull was actually ongoing down south. And because of that, it turned this book into something that I ended up really disliking. And I suppose it's good because it did obviously result in some sort of reaction to the book, but it was only because I thought that it had been done poorly. Finally, I read How Saints Die by Karma Marcus. I saw this mentioned a few months ago on Jen Campbell's channel, and as such, at the time, I knew I wanted to read it in November. This book follows the character of Ellie, and she is wondering where her mother is. She's having a bit of a hard time at school and a hard time at home because her mother is no longer there. She is worried about her mother, and she is very anxious about the world at the moment. And it really follows her story, weaving together fairy tales and folklore of the Northeast to tell this story in what could have been a great fashion. I was once again very invested in this book. I read it quite quickly. However, after chapter 30, I believe the story should have ended. I don't know what those last 50 pages did for the book, apart from completely ruin it for me. Because if it had ended at chapter 30, I know it would have been a corny ending, but it would have been the ending I think that the book deserved, because I felt like it showed certain characters in their best light, and it showed an almost rebuilding, which I thought was necessary for the end of this book. Those last 50 pages completely soiled my memory of this book, because if it had ended there, I could have forgiven the way the book spoke about the social services, because in this book the social services are presented as this great big bad, and the reason that that's done is because we don't actually have any one antagonist. So by saying social services, it creates this nameless enemy for the characters. I thought that it was a cop-out. I don't think this book necessarily needed an antagonist, because when you are a child and your teacher says something that you don't like, you're going to think they're your enemy. You are going to think that they are against you, because you have been taught throughout your childhood about heroes and villains. And I thought that Ali was actually a lot younger than we're told she is in this book, because of the way that it is written, and because of the things that she enjoys, and because of this relationship with her father. So there are a few things in here where I found myself a bit surprised, because I was like, oh, well, that doesn't really fit with what I thought of her. When it started, it was reminding me very much of like a 7 or 8 year old. And if it had been a 7 or 8 year old, I'd be like, oh yeah, it works, it fits. But then when we're told that she's 11, like, no. And I think it says here that she's, it says here that she's 10. I'm not gonna lie, didn't read the blurb before I went in here. It says she's 10 years old there, but I would never have guessed that she was 10 years old from the writing. She seemed a lot younger. I liked the fairy tale elements, I liked that they'd been woven in well, and I liked the darkness that's hinted at, but isn't real, doesn't really get explicit, doesn't get too dark for this story. But it just did those few unforgivable really, and it really just brought this book down for me to the point that I'm not really sure that I like it. If I reread it, I would probably finish at chapter 30 and have a completely different impression of the book and let myself live like that and live the way that I wanted this, that I thought this book should end, because it also had a last line. That's the thing, it had a very good last line, and then everything after that just kind of felt like, oh, this was forced in here to fill up page count. And I think that the writing style was good, but I think that the writing style actually marred the story, and I think that it was used to cover up the fact that there isn't actually that much of a good story in here. And I think that if more focus had been taken on editing this and honing this book, it would have been a lot better, because I feel like it was close, but it just wasn't there yet. And after that, this is where things went wrong. This is where my wishes, my aims got thrown out of the window, and where I just started watching days of YouTube. We're now, what, Friday? We're Friday, and I haven't finished a book since Sunday, although I have tried. So I'm going to mention those here. Firstly is a book that I've already got rid of, and that is Alison Ware's book about Mary Boleyn. I got it because I'm interested in the Tudor period. When I was at school, it was one of the ones that I really enjoyed reading about and hearing about in year 5, I remember. And so I got this book because it was exploring more of that, and also it had, I think they called her a great and infamous whore, and that was a title that I think she stole from me. So I started reading this, and it is written in the most driest writing I have ever had the misfortune to read. I mean, I was 20 pages in and I felt like I'd been reading this book for an hour. It was just this list of figures and facts, and I was just like, for crying out loud, enjoy yourself a bit. Like, I wouldn't have minded a 700-page book about Mary Boleyn if it had been written well. There's a reason they tell fictionalised versions about that woman. It's because her actual life, if it was all full of facts and figures, well, it's no wonder that her sister got beheaded. So I gave up on that book and I thought, you know what? Let's try some fiction. So I decided to finally move on to my absolute darling. This book is being got rid of. I'm not gonna lie, I bought it back in September. I've lost money buying it. I got about 50, it was between 50 and 100 pages into this book. And yeah, I just can't do it. I can't do it because I think that the prose is completely overwritten. There is too much detail in here. And the story is just, it's not a story that I want to read. I'm not gonna lie, the abuse and the way her father is with Turtle is too much for me. I can't be doing with it. It's my own fault as well. I knew that I wouldn't like this book before I started it. I was scared about reading it when I went into it, and so I should have just left it on the shelf when I had the chance, but I didn't. I thought I'd try it because everybody else liked it. We should know never to give in to peer pressure. So yeah, I'm trying to get some money for it on eBay, so we'll see how that goes because yeah, it hasn't really been read. But yeah, if you enjoyed this book, more power to you. If you're able to get through it, good for you. But there's way too much detail. It's that pretentious sort of American writing I don't like, and I thought the dialogue was just poor. Next, I tried The Lesser Bohemians by Amy McBride, and I got 100 pages into this book, which is, you know, it's close to halfway because it's 200 and something pages, and Lord, I just couldn't cope because every other page was a sex scene. And again, I'm now actually sounding like a prude with my videos because I've had to go about the sex in a few things now, but it's just like, if that's all your book is gonna be, then I'll just go and read Mills and Boon, basically. Interesting writing style, sometimes it rhymed. I actually powered through it that far because of the writing style, because I do think that she has a very good style of writing, and I did like these rhymes, and I did like the way it almost seemed a bit Shakespearean, and I liked the fact that she was doing that with a story that we have seen before, and that was what got me through to that many pages, but I just couldn't keep going with it. Then we have Sorry to Disrupt the Peace by Patty Yumi Cottrell. I read 150 pages of a 260 page book and I hated it from the first page. I kept going because it was reminding me somewhat of Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, and I thought that, you know what, let's give it a chance, let's try this. But this book is now being given away because, Lord, nothing happens. I'm 150 pages in and nothing has happened, and we're just rambling along in this rambling. This woman is rambling, and I couldn't cope with it. I did not like it. Basically, this girl's adopted brother has committed suicide, and every other page you're told it's her adopted brother, her adopted parents, my roommate, Julie, and it was every time, and it was just endless, and I couldn't cope with it for another 110 pages, and it was a very quick read, and I could not do it, so this is going as well. So that actually then set me back a bit. So hopefully I'll be able to read some more in November, and reading all those books actually made me unhaul a few books from these shelves, so they're a bit empty at the moment, because maybe I've got a box full of books behind you that amounts to about 50 books that I just decided, you know what, let's just get rid of them. If we're not going to enjoy them, if we don't think we're going to enjoy them, let's just get rid. So these shelves are looking a bit bare now. Might not even have enough books to get to the end of the year. Oh well. Anyway, if you've read any of these books and would like to discuss them, please feel free to do so down in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.